while back, while I was starting to sunset my career and think seriously about semi-retirement and what semi-retirement was going to look like, I had dreamed about having more freedom in my life. I was thinking about, wow, I'm not going to have an alarm clock anymore. My commute's going to be gone. I was going to be escaping office politics. And I thought that I would feel relieved. And then one day it happened. I left. I abruptly left. Just like that. And the chapter was now officially closed. And for the first few days and maybe weeks, I stayed busy. And then as the quiet started settling in, something suddenly happened. It wasn't what I was prepared for. The noise stopped. And I remember looking around and thinking, wait a second, is this it? It was so quiet. And at first I told myself, hey, Lisa, you should really be enjoying this. But if I'm being honest with you, what I truly felt in my heart, and at that moment, I felt loneliness, because something that I hadn't realized was that my job wasn't just my job. My job was actually my community. For years, I had seen the same people every single day. We celebrated promotions together, birthdays. We grabbed drinks after work, dinners. We shared stories. We watched each other's kids grow up. We laughed. And we basically did life together. And somewhere along the way, I assumed that those relationships would simply continue. This is something that we all do. We all assume these relationships are going to continue. But many of them don't. It's just that life just keeps moving. The office has to continue to operate with or without you. And people get busy. Suddenly, I wasn't a part of the daily rhythm anymore. I remember thinking, what's wrong with me? Lisa, you wanted all this. And then I started asking myself, why am I so sad? Maybe you've asked yourself the same thing. Maybe you're in a situation where your children have moved out. Maybe you're retired, full stop. Maybe you left a career that you've had for 40 years? And maybe you're staring at a future that looks completely different than the one that you've known, but also from the one that you thought you were going to be in. You set these expectations in your mind of how things are supposed to look. But deep down inside, something inside of you always feels unsettled. And that's exactly where I found myself at that moment. I was grieving a season of life. And nobody had prepared me for that. Nobody talked about the emotional side of moving into a new chapter. People oftentimes talk about retirement plans. They talk about the savings, their 401ks and all this stuff. And then they talk about Social Security. But very few people talk about what happens when the identity that you've carried for decades suddenly disappears. Who are you when you're no longer the employee, the team member, the account manager? Who are you when you're no longer raising children anymore? Those are the questions that started showing up for me. And honestly, I think that's the real reason so many of us feel restless in midlife. We're standing between two versions of ourselves. We're standing between the person that we were and the person that we're becoming. And that person in between can feel so incredibly lonely. And surprisingly, what I found myself doing during that in-between space, I found myself thinking back to my childhood. I started asking myself very simple questions. What did I love before the world started telling me who I should be? What did I enjoy before the career? What did I enjoy doing before responsibilities, mortgages, before the deadline started to come up. Who was I before all that took over? And as I thought about it, this little memory kept coming in. This little girl, she was about 10, 12 years old. This little girl was mowing lawns, harvesting. When I was about 10 or 12 years old, I enjoyed gardening. I enjoyed harvesting. I remember as a child growing corn, strawberries, tomatoes, leafy greens, and also helping my parents in this odd business that they had. It was a worm farm back in the 70s. And I was helping them do it, and I really enjoyed it. And I loved harvesting the vegetables and cleaning the fruit. I just thought it was amazing. And I loved being outside with my hands in the dirt. I remember this very fondly. I remember watching something come to life because I cared for it. Somewhere along the way, I abandoned that part of myself. And it wasn't intentionally. I think that life just happens. And so many of us, like myself, I put those childhood interests on a shelf somewhere. And subconsciously, I told myself that I would get to them someday. That someday finally arrived. That someday was in that in-between state. So I started gardening again. I got out in the yard and I started tilling the ground, weeding. Weeding was one of the first things I started doing. And then what I discovered really surprised me in all of this. There was something much deeper happening inside of me. The more time I spent out in the garden, the more familiar I started to feel about myself. My thoughts, those started to show up again. Old thoughts, old mannerisms, that pace, that speed that you live in when you're in that grind, that started to slow down. Even my mannerisms seemed different. The way I looked, the way I dressed, that feeling of not caring about what anybody else thinks about me started coming back because I was focusing my energy in the ground, probably on my authentic self. I started focusing and realizing who I was, basically who I had been before life became so complicated. When it came to working in the garden, the hours that I spent harvesting, landscaping, maintaining my little garden, it never felt like I was working. I really felt like I was spending valuable time on self. I felt like I was exerting a lot of toxic negative energy, getting it out, cleansing it, and I felt like I was healing again. It really felt natural for me. It didn't feel forced. I took to it very quickly. Nothing of it felt like just tasks or like it was a to-do list. The garden is always calling to me, and you want to be there. It literally felt like I had picked up where I had left off when I was that 12-year-old. And that 30-year gap that was in between that child and who I am today returned. But she returned as a woman, not as a child. And for the first time in a long time, I felt once again connected to who I truly am and who I'm truly supposed to be. And I took a great deal, and I still do, take a great deal of comfort being in the garden. I enjoy looking out at what I've created and just simply enjoying the silence. Living in the city, that's kind of hard to do, but the silence is there for me. And also, it wasn't just about gardening. I started discovering more and more of the things that I enjoyed as a child. I discovered that I started thinking about how I used to watch my mother cook in the kitchen and how much I appreciated her doing that. And when I was young, I spent a lot of time watching her. But now I really take genuine joy, like being in the kitchen and cooking. I take a great deal of pride preparing a family meal, and I feel like I've accomplished something in shaping a dinner together, or a breakfast, or having lunch. It just makes me feel so grounded. And now I find genuine joy in something else. I used to read a lot. I used to write a lot. And I started writing again. Narrations, creating stories, creating little poems. And that creative side eventually led me to creating content on social media. And honestly, if you had told me 10, 12 years ago that I would find joy sitting here in front of the camera, talking, sharing stories about what midlife is all about and talking about the life's transitions with people all over the world, I would have probably laughed at you. However, here I am now. And here we are together. What started as an attempt to fill a gap became a much bigger thing for me. It became a reminder that there are still new chapters waiting for all of us. There are still parts of ourself that are left for us to discover throughout our life, not just the early years. And sometimes that path forward, it isn't about chasing something new. Sometimes it's found by remembering who we were all along.